You're not trying to save the relationship. You're abandoning yourself. You're not exhausted because of the relationship. You're exhausted because you're the only one holding it together. And deep down, you already know that. You wake up thinking about them. Not because something beautiful happened. Not because you're excited about the day ahead. You wake up already calculating, already replaying last night's conversation, searching for the moment things shifted, already wondering what you should have said differently, what tone you should have used, whether your reaction was too much or not enough. And before the day even begins, you're exhausted. This is the part no one talks about. Not the big arguments, not the dramatic moments, but this, the quiet, invisible labor of being the one who always pays attention, the one who always notices, the one who always adjusts. You call it caring. And maybe at first it was. But somewhere along the way, caring became something else. It became watching, monitoring, managing. You started reading silences like warning signs. You started softening your words before you even spoke them. You started shrinking yourself in small ways, not all at once, but gradually, almost imperceptibly, just to keep things from falling apart. And the strange thing is, you got good at it. You learned exactly how to navigate their moods. You learned when to speak and when to disappear. You learned how to turn down the volume on your own needs so that the relationship could keep running smoothly. And because you were so good at it, no one ever told you that what you were doing had a cost. Because it does. Every conversation you carried alone, every silence you filled, every moment you swallowed what you actually felt, those things don't disappear. They accumulate. They settle somewhere deep inside you, quiet and heavy, until one day you realize you're not just tired of the relationship. You're tired of yourself inside of it. That's the feeling that brought you here. Not anger, not even sadness exactly. Just this strange, hollow exhaustion, the kind that sleep doesn't fix, the kind that follows you even on good days, the kind that makes you wonder in your most honest moments whether you've been loving someone or slowly disappearing for them. When did trying this hard start feeling like survival? You called it love. But it had another name. There's a version of love that looks exactly like love but feels nothing like it. It shows up as patience that never runs out, as understanding that has no limit, as the ability to always find a reason to stay, always find an excuse for the other person, always find a way to make the imbalance seem temporary. It looks like devotion from the outside, but from the inside it feels like walking on a floor that might give way at any moment. You've been there. You know that feeling. And the hardest part isn't recognizing it in hindsight. The hardest part is that while you were living it, it felt like the right thing to do. It felt like maturity, like emotional intelligence, like being the bigger person. No one told you that being the bigger person, every single time, without exception, without reciprocity, isn't a virtue. It's a pattern, and patterns have origins. Psychologists have a term for what happens when someone becomes the sole emotional caretaker in a relationship. They call it anxious attachment, but that clinical language doesn't quite capture what it actually feels like from the inside. From the inside, it feels like love. It feels like you care more, feel more, are more invested. It feels like proof that you're a good partner. But here's what that pattern is actually built on. It's built on fear. Not the fear of losing the person exactly. Something deeper than that. The fear that if you stop trying, if you stop adjusting, if you stop carrying, everything will collapse. And if it collapses, that means something about you. That means you weren't enough, that you failed, that the thing you were most afraid of, being left, being unwanted, being proven insufficient, was true all along. So you keep going. Not because the relationship is working, but because stopping feels like confirming your worst fear about yourself. That's not love. That's self-protection disguised as love. And the devastating irony is this. The more you protect yourself that way, the more you lose yourself in the process. Every time you abandon your own needs to keep the peace, you send yourself a message, a quiet, repeated message that says, your comfort matters less. Your limits are negotiable. You are the one who adjusts. And you believed it. The question isn't whether you loved them. You did. The question is, what were you also carrying that had nothing to do with them at all? The weight you stopped noticing. It never happens all at once. That's what makes it so difficult to see. It starts small. You reach out first because they seem busy. You let something go because the timing doesn't feel right. You explain their behavior to a friend who raised an eyebrow. Because you understand them, because you see the good in them, because you know they're going through something. These aren't red flags. They're just moments. Small, isolated, easily justified moments. Except they're not isolated. They're the beginning of a system. A quiet, invisible system where you become responsible for the emotional maintenance of the relationship. You start tracking things the other person doesn't even notice. You notice when they're withdrawing and adjust your energy accordingly. You notice when they seem irritated and start reviewing your recent behavior to find what you might have done. You notice everything, and you carry the weight of what you notice, alone in silence. And gradually, carrying all of that becomes your baseline. This is the part that's hard to explain to someone who hasn't lived it. That the weight becomes so familiar, you stop feeling it as weight. It just becomes normal. It becomes how relationships feel to you. And when someone treats you with genuine ease and reciprocity, it almost feels suspicious. Too simple. Like something must be wrong. Because your nervous system has adapted to effort as a condition of love. You've spent so long working for connection that rest started to feel like distance. You've spent so long earning your place that being welcomed freely felt unfamiliar. The exhaustion wasn't a warning sign you ignored. It was something you learned to carry so quietly that you stopped recognizing it as exhaustion at all. Until now. Because something shifted. Maybe it was a conversation that didn't go the way you hoped. Maybe it was a moment where you needed them and realized with startling clarity that they weren't there. Maybe it was nothing dramatic at all, just a quiet Tuesday evening where you sat with yourself and felt, for the first time in a long time, how tired you actually are. That moment matters. Not because it gives you all the answers, but because it breaks the numbness. And the numbness, as comfortable as it became, was never protecting you. It was just keeping you from seeing what was already true. Why you can't stop, even when you're exhausted. Here's the part that confuses most people. If you're this tired, why don't you just stop? If carrying everything is draining you, why not put it down? From the outside, the answer seems obvious. From the inside, it feels impossible. And the distance between those two perspectives is where the real story lives. Because the truth is, you already know something is wrong. You've known for a while. You've felt the imbalance. You've had the conversations in your head, rehearsed the boundaries you never set, imagined the version of yourself who finally says enough. But then something happens. A good moment, a tender look, a day where things feel almost like they used to. And you hold on to it like evidence. Evidence that you were right to stay, evidence that it's worth it, evidence that the effort is almost paying off, almost, always almost. This is not weakness. This is not stupidity. This is one of the most well-documented psychological patterns in human behavior, and it has a name. Intermittent reinforcement. When reward is unpredictable, when connection comes and goes without a clear pattern, the mind becomes obsessed with earning the next moment of closeness. Not because the relationship is good, but because the uncertainty makes the brain work harder, search longer, hold on tighter. You're not addicted to the person, you're addicted to the possibility of them. And that distinction matters, because it means the thing keeping you there isn't love in its truest form. It's hope. Specifically, the kind of hope that lives just one more conversation away, one more explanation, one more attempt at being understood. You keep going because some part of you genuinely believes that if you just find the right words, the right moment, the right version of yourself, something will finally click into place. But here's what no one tells you about that kind of hope. It's not oriented toward the relationship. It's oriented toward you, toward proving something, toward resolving something that was never actually about this person at all. And this is the moment where the conversation shifts, because what you're really trying to outrun isn't the end of the relationship. It's the feeling that the end would confirm, that you are too much or not enough, that you are fundamentally difficult to love, that the people who matter will always, eventually, pull away. And so you work. You try, you carry, not to build something, but to prevent something, to prevent the moment where your deepest fear gets to stand in the room and say, "See, I told you so." That's what you're really exhausted from, not the relationship, the performance of being someone who can't be left. And until you see that clearly, until you look at the effort not as love, but as armor, nothing will change, because you can't put down something you don't yet recognize you're holding. The invisible contract you signed, no one handed it to you. There was no moment where someone sat you down and explained the terms, but somewhere, earlier than you can probably remember, you learned something about love that stayed with you, quietly, invisibly, and shaped every relationship you've had since. You learned that love is conditional, not because someone told you that in those words, but because you felt it. In the moments where affection was withdrawn, when you didn't perform well enough. In the subtle but consistent message that connection was something you had to work for, not something you were simply allowed to have. And when a child feels that love depends on behavior, on being good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, invisible enough, they adapt. They develop strategies. They learn to read the room before they enter it. They learn to manage other people's emotions to keep themselves safe. And then they grow up. They bring those strategies into their relationships, not because they're broken, but because those strategies once worked. The problem is that what worked as survival in childhood becomes self-destruction in adulthood, because you are no longer a child who needs to earn safety, but your nervous system doesn't know that yet, and so the invisible contract gets signed. You agree, without realizing it, to be the one who tries harder, the one who adjusts more, the one who needs less and gives more, not because you chose it consciously, but because it felt familiar. And familiar, even when painful, registers in the body as safe. The person across from you may never have asked for any of this, but you showed up already knowing your role, already prepared to carry more than your share, because carrying more than your share is how you learn to make love last. The contract you signed wasn't with them, it was with your own fear. And the only person who can dissolve that contract is you. The Stoics knew this pattern. Marcus Aurelius was one of the most powerful men in the ancient world. He commanded armies, he governed an empire. And yet, the private journal he kept, never intended for anyone else to read, is filled not with celebrations of power, but with reminders. Constant, deliberate reminders to himself about what he could and could not control. He didn't write those reminders because clarity came naturally to him. He wrote them because he had to keep coming back. Because the pull toward trying to control what lies outside us, other people's behavior, other people's choices, other people's love, is one of the oldest and most persistent human tendencies. It doesn't disappear because you're wise. It has to be actively, consciously resisted. And what you've been doing in this relationship is precisely that. An attempt to control what was never yours to control. The Stoics had a name for this framework, the dichotomy of control. On one side, everything that belongs to you, your thoughts, your choices, your values, your responses. On the other side, everything that doesn't, other people's feelings, other people's decisions, whether someone chooses to meet you with the same energy you bring. Most people spend the majority of their emotional lives on the wrong side of that line, and the exhaustion you feel, that specific, deep, relentless exhaustion, is what happens when you pour your energy into the side that was never yours to manage. You are responsible for how you love. You are not responsible for whether they receive it. You are responsible for what you offer. You are not responsible for making them want it. Do you feel the difference between those two things? The moment you internalize that distinction, really internalize it, not just understand it intellectually, something shifts. Because you realize that all the energy you've been pouring into controlling the uncontrollable hasn't been protecting the relationship. It's been costing you yourself, and you felt this, not as philosophy. As a Tuesday night where you sat alone and realized you'd been managing someone else's feelings for so long, you forgot what your own felt like. As a moment in the car where everything was fine, and you still couldn't relax. As the exhaustion of performing calm when nothing inside you was calm at all. That's not a failure of love. That's the cost of living on the wrong side of the line, and you already know what that cost feels like. Not as a concept, as the specific weight of a Sunday afternoon where you should have felt fine and didn't. As the exhaustion of arriving home and realizing you spent the entire day managing how you were perceived instead of simply being who you are. That is the cost, and it has been paid, quietly, for long enough. Which brings us to a question that one man answered in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. Epictetus and the only thing that was always yours. Epictetus was born into slavery. He had no citizenship, no property, no freedom of movement. His body belonged to someone else. By every external measure, he had nothing. And yet, he became one of the most important philosophical voices in human history, not despite his circumstances, but in direct response to them. Because Epictetus discovered something most free people never find. He discovered that there is a part of you that cannot be owned, cannot be taken, cannot be controlled by anyone, no matter how much power they hold over the external conditions of your life. He called it the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty, the inner citadel, the place inside you where your true self lives, untouched and untouchable, if you choose to protect it. And his entire philosophy was built around one central question: what is actually yours? Not your body, that can be constrained. Not your reputation, that depends on other people's perceptions. Not the outcome of your relationships, those depend on choices that belong to someone else. What is yours and only yours is your judgment, your response, your values, the way you choose to meet the world, regardless of what the world brings to you. Now bring that into the context of what you've been living. You have been pouring enormous energy into things that were never yours to control. Whether they choose to show up emotionally, whether they decide the relationship is worth equal investment, these things belong to them. They always did. But here is what was always yours. Your standard for what you will accept. Your clarity about what a relationship needs to look like to be healthy. Your voice, the one you've been suppressing. Your needs, the ones you've been burying. Your truth, the one you've been editing before it reaches the surface. Those things were never taken from you. You set them down. Epictetus would say, gently but without softening the point, that this is the only place where your work actually lives, not in changing them, not in trying harder to make them see you, meet you, choose you, but in returning to yourself, in picking back up what you quietly laid down somewhere along the way. The freedom he found in slavery was not indifference, it was clarity. Clarity about what belonged to him and what didn't. Clarity that allowed him to engage with the world fully, not because he controlled it, but because he had stopped pretending he could. That clarity is available to you right now, not as a philosophy you study, as a practice you begin, the practice of asking, in each moment where you feel the pull to shrink, to suppress, to carry what isn't yours, is this mine to carry? Or have I just convinced myself it is? What you're really afraid of. Let's slow down here, because this is the part most people skip. It's easier to talk about what's wrong with the relationship, easier to analyze the other person, their patterns, their emotional unavailability, their failure to meet you halfway. And while that analysis might be accurate, it's also a very convenient place to keep your attention. Because as long as you're focused on them, you don't have to look at the thing that's actually driving everything, the fear underneath. Not the surface fear. Not I'm afraid of losing them, though that's real too. But the deeper one. The one that shows up in the quiet moments when the relationship is fine, when nothing dramatic is happening, and you still feel this low, persistent anxiety. Like you cannot afford to relax. That fear isn't about them. It never was. It's about what losing them would mean. Not the practical loss, not the shared life, the familiarity, the comfort of their presence, but the narrative loss. The story it would tell about you. Because somewhere beneath all the effort, there is a belief that if this ends, it's because you weren't enough. That if they leave, it confirms something you've been afraid was true about you all along, and that is the fear you've been running from. Not abandonment, confirmation. This is why walking away feels harder than continuing to suffer, because suffering, at least, keeps the verdict open. As long as you're still trying, still in the relationship, still working on it, you haven't failed yet. The moment you stop, the fear gets to speak. The end of a relationship does not prove you are unlovable. It proves that this particular connection, in this particular form, could not sustain itself, that's all. But when you carry a core wound that says your worth is contingent on being chosen, every ending feels like a verdict, not just a conclusion. And so the real work isn't fixing the relationship. The real work is separating your sense of self from the outcome of this relationship, understanding that who you are does not depend on whether they stay. You were already enough, before the relationship, inside it, and you will be enough after it. The fear lied, and you've been carrying the weight of that lie for a very long time. You're not holding the relationship. You're holding yourself hostage. There's a moment, and you probably know exactly what it feels like, where you catch yourself doing something you didn't want to do. Maybe you agreed to something that made you uncomfortable, and you said yes anyway. Maybe you felt hurt, genuinely hurt, and instead of saying so, you smiled and said you were fine. Maybe you had a need, a clear, legitimate human need, and you buried it before it even reached your lips, because some part of you already knew that expressing it would cost more than suppressing it. And in that moment, something important happened. Not between you and them, inside you. Every time you override your own truth to preserve the relationship, you are making a choice that feels like sacrifice, but functions like self-betrayal. Because sacrifice in its genuine form comes from abundance. It comes from a place of wholeness, where you give freely because you have enough. What you've been doing is different. You've been giving from a place of fear, giving not because you choose to, but because you're afraid of what happens if you don't. That is not love. That is hostage-taking, and you are both the captor and the captive. Every boundary you don't set teaches the relationship what you'll accept. Every emotion you suppress becomes weight you carry alone. Every time you make yourself smaller to keep the peace, you reinforce, to yourself, not just to them, that your inner world is less important than the external stability of the relationship. You stop noticing when you're doing it. The suppression becomes reflexive. The adjustment becomes automatic. You walk into a room, and you've already scanned their energy and recalibrated yourself before a single word is spoken. This isn't mindfulness, this is hypervigilance, and your nervous system pays an enormous price for running at that level of constant alertness. The relationship isn't holding you hostage, you are. And before you feel the weight of that as blame, because this is not about blame, understand what it actually means. It means you have more agency here than you've allowed yourself to believe. The walls you feel closing in are not entirely built by someone else. Some of them, the most important ones, were built by your own hands out of your own fear with your own silence. And what is built can be dismantled. The first act of liberation isn't leaving. It isn't even speaking. It's the private, internal moment where you stop pretending to yourself that what you're doing is sustainable, where you look clearly at what you've been giving up and stop calling it love when it has cost you your own truth. Because a relationship that requires you to disappear in order to survive is not a relationship worth surviving. The moment you realize you've been disappearing, it doesn't announce itself. There's no dramatic moment where you look in the mirror and see a stranger. It's quieter than that, more the accumulation of 1,000 small moments than the impact of one large one. But at some point, something cracks the surface. Maybe it's a question someone asks, a friend, a family member, someone who knew you before this relationship, and you realize you don't know how to answer it anymore. Not because the question is complicated, but because the answer requires you to know what you want, what you think, what you feel, and somewhere along the way those things became difficult to access. Or maybe it's something simpler. You're doing something alone, reading, walking, sitting in silence, and you feel a strange, unfamiliar feeling, a feeling that takes you a moment to identify because it's been so long since you felt it. You feel like yourself, and the fact that it feels unfamiliar is the thing that breaks you open, because that is the moment of recognition, not dramatic, not cinematic, just quiet and devastating and clarifying all at once. The recognition that the person you've been inside this relationship, careful, monitoring, adjusting, suppressing, is not the full version of who you are. It's a managed version, a version designed to keep the peace, earn the love, prevent the loss. And the full version of you has been waiting. This is what emotional self-abandonment actually looks like from the inside. It doesn't feel like abandonment while it's happening. It feels like compromise, like maturity, like being the kind of person who doesn't make everything about themselves. It feels in its own strange way like love. But love doesn't require you to disappear. Real love, the kind worth having, expands who you are. It doesn't compress you. It doesn't ask you to edit your needs before you've even felt them. It doesn't make you feel like your full presence is a burden. If you have been feeling like your full presence is a burden, that is information, not a verdict on you. It is information about the dynamic you've been living inside. That version of you is not gone. They've just been quiet for a while, waiting for you to remember that they were always the one worth protecting. The question that changes everything. Most people in this situation ask the wrong question. They ask, what can I do to make this better? What haven't I tried yet? What do I need to change about myself so that this finally works? And those questions feel productive. They feel like forward motion. They feel like the responsible, mature thing to ask when a relationship is struggling. But they are the wrong questions. They all begin with you as the problem. They keep you in the position you've always been in. The one who adjusts, the one who works, the one who carries the weight of making things function. So here is the question that actually changes something. Not what more can I do, but what would I have to stop being for this to keep working? Sit with that for a moment, because it's a different kind of question. It doesn't ask you to add more effort to what you're already doing. It asks you to look clearly at what this dynamic has required you to sacrifice, and whether you're willing to keep paying that price. Would you have to keep suppressing your needs? Would you have to keep pretending that certain things don't hurt you? Would you have to keep explaining yourself to someone who has never quite made you feel understood? Would you have to keep disappearing? Because if the answer to that question is yes, if the relationship can only survive on the condition that you continue to be less than you fully are, then what you've been protecting is not a relationship. It's an arrangement. An arrangement where your role is to provide stability, emotional labor, and continuity, and their role is simply to remain. That is not partnership. And on some level, you've known that for longer than you've been willing to admit. The question stops asking whether you're trying hard enough and starts asking whether trying this hard is costing you something you cannot afford to lose. And that clarity is the beginning of something, not the end of the relationship, necessarily, but the end of the version of you that was willing to disappear for it. What real connection actually feels like. You may have forgotten, or perhaps you never quite had a reference point for it, but real connection, the kind that doesn't cost you yourself, has a very specific feeling, and it's worth describing carefully, because one of the most disorienting effects of carrying a relationship alone for a long time is that you lose your sense of what normal actually feels like. The imbalance becomes your baseline, the effort becomes your definition of love, and when something healthier appears, it can feel almost suspicious, too easy, too calm, somehow lacking the intensity you've come to associate with caring deeply. That is not depth, that is dysregulation, and the two can feel identical from the inside. Real connection doesn't make you feel like you're constantly auditioning. You don't lie awake, reconstructing conversations, searching for what you did wrong. You don't feel the need to manage your personality before you enter the room. You don't experience the other person's mood as a weather system you're responsible for navigating. You feel, instead, something that might initially seem unremarkable. You feel at ease, not the false ease of numbness where you've simply stopped expecting anything, but the genuine ease of being in the presence of someone who is actually glad you're there, who doesn't require you to be a smaller or more manageable version of yourself. In that kind of connection, you don't feel like you're holding anything together. You feel like you're building something together. Holding something together is exhausting because it's defensive. You're preventing collapse. The structure depends on your constant attention. The moment you stop, everything wobbles. Building something together is energizing, even when it's hard, because it's generative. The effort has direction. And when you step back, the thing you've built doesn't immediately fall apart, because it doesn't rest entirely on you. You deserve that kind of connection. Not as a reward for suffering long enough in an imbalanced one, not someday, when you've worked on yourself enough. Now, as you are, with the full complexity of your needs and your history and your imperfections. Real connection begins the moment you stop editing yourself for someone else's comfort. Stop carrying what was never yours to carry alone. You came into this video tired, not the kind of tired that a good night's sleep fixes, the kind that has been building quietly, invisibly, over months or maybe years of being the one who tries, the one who carries, the one who stays up late wondering why love has to feel this heavy, this uncertain, this much like work. And if this video has done what it set out to do, you don't leave it with answers. You leave it with clarity. Clarity about what has actually been happening, not in the relationship but inside you. Clarity about the invisible contract you've been honoring, the fear you've been running from, the version of yourself you've been setting aside in exchange for the possibility of being chosen. Stoicism doesn't ask you to stop loving. It never did. It asks you to love without losing yourself in the process, to distinguish between what is yours to carry and what was never yours to carry at all. You cannot pour from a vessel that has been emptied. You cannot love well when you have abandoned yourself in the process of loving. You cannot build something real on a foundation of your own suppressed truth. The relationship you deserve does not require your disappearance. It does not run on your anxiety. It runs on something much simpler: your presence, your honesty, your full self. So here is the question this video leaves you with. Not a question with an easy answer. Not one you need to resolve tonight, but a question worth sitting with, honestly and without the noise of fear drowning it out. Are you staying because this relationship genuinely feeds who you are, or because leaving would force you to finally face the fear you've been running from all along? That question is not an instruction, it is an invitation. An invitation to stop carrying what was never yours to carry alone, to stop mistaking self-abandonment for love, to stop measuring your worth by whether someone chooses to stay, and to begin more slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely, the most important relationship you will ever be responsible for, the one with yourself.